Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hey folks, and welcome back to the I Thought You'd Like to Know show. This is your host, Pat Flynn, and I'm always excited to be chatting with you. Look forward to our conversations. We are live here at WCAT Radio, and if you feel so inclined to join the conversation tonight, allow me to give you the call-in number. I think we might have time for that. Let's see here. You know what? Let me get back to you on that. Call-in number, because it seems like WCAT has updated its website, and it is looking mighty spiffy. So if you haven't been over to WCATradio.com, please do take a peek. We've had a complete overhaul, but the phone number to call in has apparently gone missing. So we'll see what we can do before the end of this episode. We would obviously love to hear your questions and comments. And the topic for tonight, at least the general topic for tonight, is a sort of classic principle that has long been promoted through the church, through Catholic culture, and that's a principle known as freedom for excellence. Now, a little bit of background on this and why I'm interested in talking about this tonight. So I have recently finished my upcoming book. That book is called How to Be Better at Almost Everything. And the argument I make in this book, it's actually not a religious book, though it's grounded in solid Catholic principles, freedom for excellence being one of them. But it's not technically a religious book. It's actually going to live in the business space in bookstores. And the book sets out to make the argument that in today's world, for humans in general, if you want to get ahead, if you want to find some type of competitive advantage, some type of creative advantage, then you should focus more on stacking skills rather than specializing. So I promote this idea of becoming a generalist, of becoming good to great at many different things, or at least fairly competent, and then combining skills to form competitive and creative advantages in life. But the book opens up with a philosophical statement for this idea of freedom for excellence. And oh, by the way, the book How to Be Better at Almost Everything is available for pre-order. You can check it out either on Amazon or howtobebetterbook.com. Howtobebetterbook.com. But like I was saying, the book opens up with a statement on this idea of freedom for excellence. And what I try to do to set the tone for the pages to come is get the idea very clear in our mind that there are really two different types of freedom. This is where anybody who's familiar with these Catholic principles will immediately be able to detect some of my influences. But I go on to explain these two different types of freedom, and it's these different types of freedom that I would like to talk with you tonight. I think this principle is exceptionally important for happiness, for human flourishing, and ultimately for having the best possible relationship with yourself and others while here on Earth. And the first type of freedom is the one that most of us are familiar with, most of us still tend to cherish in Western society, though it seems that there's some people who are increasingly hostile toward the idea, and that's the idea of liberty, or autonomous self-direction. You go your way, I'll go mine. You don't bother me, I won't bother you. You can believe what you want, I'll believe what I want. And so long as we can just respect each other, not do harm to one another, then I'm sure we'll get along just fine. Don't tread on me. That's autonomous self-direction. That's one of the first types of freedom. And that is indeed a very good freedom. We want that freedom. We want to embrace that freedom. I would argue we want a certain culture underneath that freedom, and I would even continue to argue that a certain culture is necessary for that type of freedom to even be possible. But given those assumptions, which are pretty large assumptions, I think we can all agree that liberty, individual liberty, is a good thing. It is, of course, for those of us living in America, one of the founding principles of the country. The right to pursue happiness, however you so seek, liberty, life. These rights are self-evident, not sacred, as Ben Franklin wanted to scratch out, but self-evident. Self-evident we'll have to do. And so, yes, we want to affirm that autonomous self-direction is a good thing. We are, of course, rational animals. We have free will. We have intellect. And we want to have the freedom to pursue a knowledge of God, to come into a relationship with God. We need to be able to do that freely. To love someone means nothing if it's forced. So we need those grounds of freedom if we're going to have anything such as love be meaningful or even possible. Now, that's the first type of freedom. And the thing to know about that freedom, liberty, or autonomous self-direction, is it's really only a necessary but not sufficient means or grounds for human flourishing. If we really want to get along in life in a good way, if we really want to make the most of ourselves, then just having individual liberty is not enough, because as most of us know and probably experience both personally in our own lives and in witnessing the lives of others, with freedom comes the freedom to do stupid things, to act a fool, to do harmful things with yourself and others. So freedom always bears a risk. Freedom always bears a risk. There's no such thing as risk-free freedom. And this we can draw back fundamentally all the way to the doctrine of the fall. Why did, God created humans for free will, and so came the risk that humans would, at some point, possibly choose themselves over God. But bringing it back down to the more proximate level, to our everyday situation here and now, not to say that here and now people don't freely reject God, they certainly do, but on the political level, let's say, people can choose poorly. They sometimes very much do choose poorly, and this is why I said before that having a culture underneath the liberty, a moral culture especially, and of course I would say a Catholic moral culture most especially, is really essential if we're going to have liberty be something that can really cause us, steer us in the right direction. Plopping liberty on a very morally confused culture is just going to lead to people making morally confused decisions, so far as I can tell, and that seems to be often what's happening today. We've lost that sort of very well-knitted moral fabric that this country was founded on, and I think we're seeing some of the consequences of that. Okay, but moving on. So we have liberty, we have autonomous self-direction, but there's this other type of freedom. And this type of freedom is the idea that there's a freedom that we can attain for excellence. A freedom for excellence. Now, on first analysis, this type of freedom almost seems opposite of the other type of freedom. Because if we're going to define freedom for excellence, we could say it's something like disciplining the desires to make the good at first accessible, then effortless. So I'll say that one more time. Disciplining the desires to make the good at first accessible and then effortless. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that there's better and worse ways of living. There's better and worse ways of acting. There's better and worse ways of speaking. There's better and worse ways of doing things in general. It means we have to live, really, according to a certain set of rules. We have to live under a set of restrictions. And that's why, at first, this seems to be at odds. We have this one freedom, this type of freedom that sort of allows us to do whatever we want, Then we have this other freedom, freedom for excellence, which says, look, if you want to be most the kind of creature that you are, if you want to flourish as the type of being that you are, then you need to do things a certain way. It's not enough to just do things however you want or whatever feels good in the moment. Some ways, some paths, some methods, some decisions are objectively better than others, and they will produce objectively better results for you. That's starting to get at the idea of freedom for excellence. Now, I think we can make this a little bit more concrete by giving an example or two. So I have the liberty, I'm looking at my guitar right now, as I typically am in my little studio here, is I have the liberty to play the guitar however I want. I can play it upside down, I can play it with my feet. That's autonomous self-direction, right? Who are you? Who is anybody to tell me how to play the guitar? But if I want to be a good guitar player, if I want to have the freedom to express myself as a virtuosic musician, well then I can't just play the guitar however I want. I got to play the guitar a certain way. I have to practice a certain way. I have to follow a certain set of rules, a method, a process to be a good guitar player. It's not enough to just approach the instrument however I want. And the reason we call this freedom for excellence is that when you take the time to discipline yourself, to discipline those desires and get on the right path, you actually gain more freedom later on. So if I don't discipline myself to play guitar in an effective and efficient manner, to really practice in a way that will get results, then I won't have the freedom to play the guitar because I will never have developed the ability to do it. So it's through the disciplining of desires that we unlock abilities to express ourselves at a higher pitch, to express ourselves in ways that we previously weren't capable of, to gain a new type of freedom. I'll give you another example. This one from fitness. Handstands. How many people have the freedom to do handstands? Probably not a lot, right? Not a lot of people you know, not a lot of people I know can stand or walk on their hands. But this is something I've worked very hard at, and I can tell you it's not enough to just want to stand on your hands, to balance on your hands, to do handstands. There's a way to go about it, and there's better or worse ways to go about practicing this. And to the extent you're willing to follow the process, follow the rules, use the progressions, the quicker you'll get to being able to have the freedom to do a handstand. I have the freedom to balance on my hands upside down. I have unlocked an ability that a lot of other people don't have because they haven't disciplined themselves. They haven't given themselves that freedom for some type of excellence. Studying philosophy, knowing things about the world also requires discipline, also a measure of freedom for excellence. And the idea, the point I try to get in my book is that, put the business stuff aside a minute. And, it is a business book. I do want to help entrepreneurs kind of get off the ground or grow their business to the next level. Put that all aside. The point I ultimately want to make is it's through freedom for excellence that we really flourish as human beings, that we can become intrinsically satisfied so far as that's possible here on earth, that we can achieve, as what Aquinas would talk about, is imperfect happiness. The closest we can get here on earth, without moving into the beatific vision, without experiencing God himself. Now, perfect happiness is, of course, reserved for heaven. That's not something possible while we are here and alive in this world. But imperfect happiness, human flourishing, can insofar be attained to the extent that we're willing to live a certain way, to the extent that we're willing to discipline the desires to make the good at first accessible and then effortless. So while my book is focused on a lot of the businessy stuff, if we can call it that, the main philosophical point I want to make at the beginning is like, hey, we all want to be happy. There's nobody here that I know, I'm writing a book, I don't know where here would be, there's nobody I know of or can think of, I don't think there's anybody in the world who doesn't pursue happiness. We all seek happiness. Think about it. Is there one thing that you can imagine in life that you did that you didn't think would somehow, in some way, either sooner or later, contribute to your happiness. Even the things that we don't like to do, we're doing them because we think we'd probably be more miserable if we didn't do them. Think of having to get up really early to go to work. Okay, not all of us like that. But we know that doing that keeps the bills paid and, keeps the collection agencies away and so on and so forth. So we think that we will be happier, in that little short-term amount of suffering than if we decided to sleep in and lost our job. We are rational in that sense. And you can, draw this out to anything. Anything that you do in life, you do it because you think it will make you happy. You do it because you think it will make you happy. And the truth is that's a very interesting thing. But it's also a very good thing. It points beyond. It points to the transcendent. Because we have this yearning for happiness, but we can never quite or completely satisfy that yearning here on earth, can we? We can try to make a bunch of money. Doesn't make us perfectly happy. We can try to find the perfect spouse. Doesn't make us perfectly happy. Glory, fame, honor. None of these can make us perfectly happy. Some things certainly make us more happy than other things. Father Spitzer has a very nice presentation on the 4 levels of happiness that I would recommend, which is a little bit beyond the topic that I'm talking about now. So some things are certainly better for making ourselves more happy here on earth, but nothing here on earth can ever perfectly satisfy that transcendent yearning, the soul's upward yearning to know and experience God, to find its perfect happiness in heaven. That said, what are these things that can make us more or less happier on earth? Well, I mean, the highest is a pursuit to know and love God. That is the highest thing, and we know that faith is a theological virtue, that is ultimately a gift, but it's a gift that we need to respond to. It's a gift we need to respond to. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to be receptive to God's grace and to cooperate with God's grace. Right? So that's the highest good, But there's many other good things along the way. God, contemplation of God, relationship with God, highest good, because that is what will ultimately and completely satisfy us. But there's other good things along the way that support that and can help lead us to that. And one of these things, and I do spend some time talking about them in the book, are, of course, the virtues. And we've talked about the virtues before, so I won't spend too much time on this. But things like prudence, temperance, fortitude, justice, those are the cardinal virtues. And then we know that faith, hope, and charity, or faith, hope, and love, are the 3 theological virtues, drawing from Aquinas on this. And we can see how, at least I hope we can see, how developing these virtues can and should and will make us happier. They're happiness makers. That's one way to think of virtues. They're happiness makers. But they're not necessarily easy to do, and we often need to ask for God's help in developing the virtues. The theological virtues especially, those are only gifts. But the cardinal virtues are things that, again, disciplining the desires to make these goods at first accessible and then effortless. And when you read the great thinkers on the virtues, from Aristotle to Aquinas, they'll let you know, a virtuous act is like becoming a good to become a virtuous person is to become like a tennis player. And what does that mean? Well, it means you're not a tennis player if you, by chance, have one good tennis serve one day. It doesn't make you a good tennis player, okay? Well, same thing with virtues. Like, you're not a virtuous person if you do one good charitable act or one act of justice or you make one prudent decision. No. Virtues are habits. They're something that needs to be developed over time through consistent practice, application, and discipline. Okay? And prayer. Definitely prayer. Prayer is a huge, huge part of that. Prayer is a huge part of that. And so you become a virtuous person in the same way that you become a virtuous tennis player in terms of the cardinal virtues, by practicing. And practicing every single day, and hopefully, preferably practicing every single moment that you get. You know, and it starts, and this is something I can look in my life, I think especially since my reconversion to Catholicism, and taking the virtues as seriously as I can, taking natural law as seriously as I can, God's commandments as seriously as I can, of things that I've had to change about my life. Now, I don't think I was a horribly, I don't think I was a moral abomination, but there were certain things that I did and would do that I needed to ask for God's help with in changing to become a more virtuous person. You know, one thing I think that we need to be aware of, or how little vices can often creep up and deteriorate our virtuous quality. White lies, for example, right? Okay, we're not intending to do harm, but you know, the point of speaking is to speak truth. To speak truth. Always doing whatever you can to say what is true and avoid speaking what isn't. You know, it's a simple axiom by Aquinas. You know, to do what is good and avoid what is evil. Sounds so obvious it's almost not worth saying, but there's such good, deep truth in that. And this is where the virtues help us. You know, prudence helps us to discern what the right decision in the moment is, because sometimes it might be hard to figure out. You know, not every situation is so, you know, easily discerned what the right moral decision is. Furthermore, prudence, then comes, you know, temperance. You know, making sure that you understand that abstinence, capacity, kind of go hand in hand. When you abstain from things, you build capacity. You know, deprivation builds capacity. And temperance doesn't mean that you have to be a complete, you know, teetotaler or anything like that. You can't enjoy any pleasures in life. But again, it's tempering them, not eliminating them, but tempering them, making sure that you are disciplining the desires rather than the desires controlling you. That's where temperance comes in. Fortitude, grit, I think is probably the closest common word there. Grit. Understanding that nothing good comes easy. To develop yourself morally, to do things that are worthwhile, it's going to be work. You're going to be tested. Same thing with faith, right? So I used to wonder, well, why is faith a virtue? That doesn't make sense to me. But then when you think about what faith is, trusting in that which you have good reason to believe, and you think of all the times you're tested, all the emotional ups and downs that you go through in life, then it makes sense. Yeah, like faith needs to be there. Faith needs to be consistent regardless of what your temperament is on any given day. So that's when you start to see, yeah, faith definitely is a virtue. And, you know, fortitude plays into that. Fortitude plays into that big time. Justice, giving people what they deserve. Giving people what they deserve, right? Fairness, very, very important. I don't think anybody disagrees too much with the idea of justice. We might disagree on what exactly justice looks like in certain situations. But I think, you know, if there's anything that people just generally agree on, it's just, yeah, like justice is a good thing. We all want justice. So that's the overview of some of the virtues. And the idea of freedom for excellence is, morally, we can achieve, you know, freedom for moral excellence when we really work in cooperation with God's grace and providing our best effort to develop these virtues so that way we can become more virtuous. You know, Mother Angelica, one of my great heroes, always used to say, we are all called to be great saints. She's absolutely right. You know, the virtues are something that we can all and should strive to develop. Not just because it's good for society. I mean, clearly society could only stand to benefit by teaching virtues and having a virtuous populace. Hugely great for society. But for the individual, it's so great and so important for the individual to have this virtuous way of living. It really is. Often sort of like to think of morality as an instruction manual. Virtues and morality as an instruction manual. Like, hey, God designed us. Morality is sort of the blueprint for how to best run the machine, right? And who would know better than God on the best way for humans to behave, to become most the kinds of creatures they are, and to most find their fulfillment and happiness. So when you ask, like, well, why should I do what God commands me? It's really kind of a silly question. You're really asking, well, why should I do what I ought to do? It just doesn't make any sense. God is the center of oughtness. He is what our ultimate good is. So if there's any ought at all, it is to know and pursue and love God. And then the virtues, help us to not only do that. Grace helps to perfect human nature. It doesn't attempt to eliminate human nature. But then it also strengthens the bonds and the benefits that we get from relationships with other people as well. Aristotle used to talk about the different types and kinds of friendship, and the highest level was a virtuous friendship. And a virtuous friendship is where you really will the good of the other, where you enjoy somebody and you want to see them flourish and you enjoy growing with them. It's not a friendship based on utilitarianism, right? You're not friends with this person just because they make you laugh or something like that. It's not a self-interested friendship that they make you feel good about yourself. These friendships are very, very rare because it takes virtuous people to form these types of friendships, and virtuous people are very, very rare. Very, very rare. I think it's an absolute catastrophe that the virtues are they're not taught. They're just not taught to children anymore. Now children take these sort of silly value assessment quizzes where they get to, fill in their own values, define their own values, which is just nonsense. Of course it's nonsense. And what an ironic thing when you think about it. Because, the schools, I guess, are attempting to say, well, let's not impose values on anybody. But by doing this, they are imposing values. They're imposing relativism. They're imposing relativism. By saying anybody can pick their own values, they are imposing a value system. And it's the worst one that you can possibly think of, moral relativism. Oh, how I long for the days when we could get back to just teaching the kids proper virtue ethics, natural law theory, and one might ultimately hope, Catholic social teaching and the great truths of the Catholic Church as well. So I just wanted to run that by you. This will be a little bit of a shorter conversation tonight, and I hope you enjoyed this brief episode on freedom for excellence and the different kinds of freedom. It's been a very important and interesting principle to me, and it was something that I really wanted to get out in my book as much as possible. And I guess the last thing I will say is, even though this book isn't a religious book, it's written by somebody who cares extremely much about promoting the Catholic faith and the Catholic Church. And what I've realized is when you can promote things like virtues and freedom for excellence, that opens people up, because I realize that there's great beauty and truth in that, and it starts to kind of nudge them towards thinking a little bit more about Catholicism, about the one true faith. So I will leave you with that, good people. This has been Pat Flynn. Thank you for joining me tonight, and we will talk to you next week on the I Thought You'd Like to Know show. I think we'll be having an interesting interview coming up on an argument against agnosticism. So stay tuned from that, and we will see you then.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.